Cool. So our exploration this evening is going to be around the fascinating story of the birds sent forth from the Teva, from the Ark. This week's Parsha is, of course, Parshat Noach. There's a lot to discuss in Parshat Noach. Of course, the very nature of the flood and what happened before it that caused it, the time on the Teva, on the Ark. Once they left the Ark, the whole story with Noach and his sons and him getting drunk, leaving the Ark, and then of course the Parsha finishes off with Migdal Bavel, the Tower of Bavel. So lots of stuff that can be discussed, but I thought to look at the story of the two birds. So at the end of while the rain had stopped and they were floating around, at a certain point, Noach wants to send out some birds to figure out what it is, whether the waters had receded and whether it's time to leave. Okay? Now, he sends out, at first, a raven, and afterwards he sends a dove. But what's fascinating is that the raven, historically, culturally, comes to represent, if I were to ask you, what does the raven represent? What do we normally associate with the raven? That's not a rhetorical question. What do you think?
That's a scary bird.
Yeah, it's a scary bird, right? And so, sorry, what was that?
They'd peck your eyes out.
They do, although magpies would as well. They're probably. What's the relation between magpies and crows? I'm sorry, ravens and crows. I'm wondering. I'm searching someone to do it.
I think ravens are bigger and more feisty. Magpies and crows are AFL teams.
So ravens are larger. Yes. Ravens often travel in pairs, while crows are seen in large groups. Okay, so there you go. So a raven comes to represent, they're scary, they eat your eyes out. What else? What do they come to? Well, there's the famous poem. Just give me 1 second here. Hold on 1 second, sorry. Okay, cool. So let's just share. I'm going to share my screen here for a moment. And there's, of course, the very famous poem by Edgar Allan Poe. Prophet, said I, thing of evil. Prophet still, if bird or devil. Whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore. Is there balm in Gilead? In Gilad, right? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Now, I'm not sure how much you guys know about this poem. I remember reading it when we were in high school, but it's been a while. Does anyone know what the poem is about? So in my very quick Googling, which is the equivalent of when we were in high school, we would read the Spark Notes, right? Yes, Spark Notes. Jaffa, did you guys read Spark Notes in your days? You wouldn't. Obviously, you would read the book.
Yeah,
right?
Spark Notes is definitely an easy way to read a book.
Yeah. So I guess Wikipedia is, well, it's not exactly the same thing, but yes, you can get everything that you want. Plus, I'm sure you could probably buy essays online as well. Anyway, the poem is about actually grief. Edgar Allan Poe speaking about grief. A loved one of his passed away, and the raven is saying nevermore, in a sense that there are these things that will never be more again, which so it's an expression of grief. But in this situation, the raven comes to represent grief or death, harbinger of bad news, if you will. Now, it's not clear where Poe was getting that from, right? What are his cultural references? Maybe he himself was reading the Torah. I don't know. So it's not clear, and maybe he's just looking at the raven as a symbol. And I'm sure he has other cultural, historical references. But what we're going to see is that actually the raven is not necessarily such a straightforward symbol. And so we're going to try to understand, what does the raven represent in the story of Noach, in the story as it plays here. Okay? Now, we'll begin by just looking at a verse together from the Parshat. This is at the end, after it's been raining. Noach's been on the ark for a while, and it says, "Vayizkor Elohim et Noach v'et kol hachaya v'et kol habehema asher ito bateva, vaya'aver Elohim ruach al haaretz vayashoku hamayim." We actually, this pasuk is part of something that we said quite recently. Does anyone know what this pasuk is part of that we did quite recently?
Isn't it part of Yom Kippur, davening?
Close.
Is it in Slichot?
No. Al is close.
Must be Rosh Hashanah then.
Yeah, it is Rosh Hashanah.
Is it in the Musaf? In the three sections of the Musaf? I mean,
exactly. Very good. This is in the Zichronot section, right? Because that's Vayizkor Elohim et Noach, and God remembered. So this is an example of God remembering. So here you have, and that's a separate question that we actually explored in advance of Rosh Hashanah. What does it mean for God to remember? But God remembers Noach and all the beasts, and he causes the wind to blow, and it's all good. Okay? Now, what's fascinating to point out, and this is a shear that exists on its own that we could do, is the name of God that is mentioned here. A very interesting exercise that one can do that can open up many different levels and layers of understanding when you're looking at the Torah is by taking note of the name of God used. As we know, there is, of course, one God. Okay, that's just, you should know that, guys, one God, right? But God has multiple expressions as reflected by the different names through which we know God. So, of course, we talk about, Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey, right? The name Havaya, which means the God that brings everything into being with compassion and love. Elohim, on the other hand, represents God's judgment. So Elohim is bound up with God's judgment. And so whenever you see the name Elohim in the Torah, it is an expression of judgment. What's fascinating is areas in which it seems to be backwards. It seems to be that one particular name of God is used in a scenario in which you might expect another. So I'll give you a famous example that comes from, in a few weeks' time, the story of Avraham and Sodom. In the story of Avraham and Sodom, then when God destroys the city of Sodom, you might think that the name that would be used there would be Elohim, right? Because that's an expression of God's judgment. He's judged the people of Sodom. He's found them wanting, and he destroys them. But no, it says Vahashem himtir al haaretz, and God, the name of God's compassion, caused sulfur and ash to rain down upon the land. Okay, and you can find, and the question is why. Maybe we can talk about that in a few weeks. But here we see the name Elohim used, and again, what's fascinating is the way and the times in which, in this particular parsha of Parshat Noach, how it moves back and forth between these different names. Now, some people have suggested, oh, therefore there's different authors. No, it's not that simple. That's a simple, simplistic way of looking at it. There are deeper layers that's not the focus of this week's shir. But when you're looking at the Parsha over Shabbat, and you're opening up, you're like, it does seem to jump back and forth. And why is that? Maybe if we have time at the end, we can discuss that. But nonetheless, in this pasuk here, it says, Vayizkor Elokim et Noach. God remembers Noach, but we can insinuate through the use of the word Elokim, which again represents God's judgment, that this might also be an experience of what Noach is feeling. Or maybe actually before I start to go down that path, I'm going to ask you, why might you think that at this point, the name of Elokim, which connotes God's judgment, is the one being used? Seemingly, this would be an act of kindness, would it not be? What do you think? I'll stop sharing. Any suggestions, any thoughts as to why that? It's a complex question.
Maybe because the world's at the time, everyone's being judged. The world's about to come to an end. Animals.
I know. Sorry, John. You jumped in just a little bit late, so I just wanted to give the context. This is after the flood, while they're floating there in the water. The rain is stopped. The sun is shining. Actually, it's dark. It's nighttime at this point, but that's besides the point. But the waters are calm, but yet it's just water everywhere, right? And certainly not a drop to drink. So at this point it says, and God remembers Noach, but God Elokim, and he pushes away and he brings a wind. Okay, so what do you think? I mean, what might be going on here at this moment?
Perhaps Hashem is judging him at that time.
Hashem is judging who?
Noah.
Okay, interesting, right? So maybe, right, Hashem is still judging Noach here, right? So it's a very kind of a straightforward, good answer. When I say straightforward, it doesn't mean it's a good answer, right? Hashem is still judging Noach. There's still an expression of judgment here. And maybe also, from Noach's perspective, there's still judgment in the world, right? Meaning he's opened up, and he's looked outside, he's like, man, it's all gone. So he is still experiencing it's possible that with the windows closed throughout the time in which he's and it's raining for however many days it's raining, he can't really look outside and get a sense of what's going on. It's just chaos. It's kind of like, when you step out after the storm to see whose cars got smashed, right? You get a sense of the type of damage. And so this is still a moment of Elokim. This is still an experience of Elokim, of God's judgment. Okay? We're going to... Okay. I'm going to share my screen back again. Okay, so this is a time Noach is still experiencing the destruction, the judgment of God. And so what happens next? Vayhi miketz 40 yom. Vayftach Noach et chalon hateva asher asah. So at the end of the 40 days, Noach opens up the window of the ark that he had made. Vayishlach et ha'orev, vayetze yatzo vashov, ad yevoshet hamayim me'al haaretz. Right? And he sent out the raven. It went to and fro until the waters had dried up from the earth. Does the raven return? Seemingly not, right? It doesn't say that it just says, Vayetze yatso v'shov, so he went to and fro. It doesn't mean when it says v'shov, it doesn't mean that he has returned to, but he's just going back and forth. That's the language that's used to describe. So he gets sent out, and he doesn't return. Okay, so let's notice that. We'll just hold that here. Noach sends out a raven first. Why do you think he sends out a raven first? Any ideas before we start to look at some of the...
A raven will eat anything.
And?
So if it doesn't come back, that means there's something for it to eat.
Okay, good. So in that sense, right, maybe But how will he know?
Well, if it doesn't come back,
Maybe it's dead.
incomplete. Could be it's dead. Yeah, could be. But I mean, the sentence looks a little bit ambiguous. It went to and fro. It went to and fro until the waters had dried up.
Meaning it continued to be there until the water, and then they said, "Oh, look, it's the raven."
Could have been going backwards and forwards for a few days.
Yeah. But I like the way you're thinking of saying, maybe it's found, it would have eaten anything and it can therefore find food. But as a test, he wants it to come back, right? That would be assume why he would send it out. Okay.
Why does he send it out? He wants to. Surely he doesn't want it to come back, because if it comes back, it means that there's nothing for it to alight on. Well,
it's seemingly, and this we'll see in some of the Meforshim afterwards. Maybe he sent it just because, again, the dove comes back, right? So he sends out the dove, and the dove comes back. And when the dove comes back with a tree branch in its mouth, then he's able to say, "Oh, okay, there's something, there's land, there is land." But we can only assume that he sent out the raven for the same purpose. Okay.
Yeah. Just a question: if the raven hadn't come back, then surely there wouldn't be ravens in this world.
If the raven hadn't come back, then there wouldn't be ravens.
So he took two of each animal, or did he take more birds?
Sorry, say that last thing again.
Did he take more than two animals?
Well, did he take more than two ravens?
For instance, yeah.
I want you, Craig, hold on to that, because we're going to see some interesting sources just dealing with that very question there. Okay.
Just mated on the raven had enough of the squawking in his ear and just.
Well, we'll see. He might have been annoyed with him. Look at these verses here of him sending out the raven. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And now let's compare that to the verses of him sending out the dove. Okay, maybe I'll try to leave them together a little bit. Vayishalach et hayona me'ito lirot hakalu hamayim me'al pnei ha'adama. And he sent out the dove. And if you look here, it just says to see whether the waters had decreased. What word in the translation have they kind of left out? Me'ito, right? I don't know why they haven't. Maybe they feel like there's a redundancy in there, but as you'll see, the Meforshim, the commentators, pick up on that word. Me'ito means from himself. Okay, so he sends out the dove from himself, and then it gives us a reason why. Right up above, it just says Vayishalach et ha'orev. It doesn't tell us why he did it. He just sends it out, and then it goes around, and we can assume something, but it doesn't tell us that. It doesn't tell us why. But here it says, and he sends it out me'ito, from him, to see if the waters had decreased or not. And let's continue. Just look at the verses. V'lo matza'a hayona manoach l'chaf ragla v'tashav elav el hateva ki mayim al pnei kol haaretz. Vayishlach yado vayikacheha vayave ota elav el hateva. But the dove could not find a resting place for its foot, and returned him to the ark, for there was water over all the earth. So putting out his hand, he took it into the ark with him. This time the dove goes and comes out. Vayachel od shivat yamim achem vayosef shalach et hayona min hateva. Yosef sees that the dove is a worthy messenger, as opposed to the raven who's going around. Here the dove went and came back, so he sends it out again after another 7 days. Vatavo elav hayona leit erev v'hinei alei zayit taraf befiha vayeda Noach ki kalu hamayim me'al haaretz. The dove came back to him towards evening, and there in its bill was a plucked off olive leaf. And so Noach knew that the waters had decreased on the earth. Okay, so here it's worked. He's come back with a tree, with an olive branch, lots of symbolism within that particular image. the dove has come back. So if we look at we compare the raven to the dove, there's the language of him sending out from himself, ne'ito, is absent. He doesn't seem to send it out with the same purpose, right? It doesn't mention why he sends it out, as opposed to with the dove, it does. It gives a reason why he sent it out. Now, those are all, little hints that the different meforshim, that the different commentators will pick up on when it's very common. You'll take these two things, you compare them and say, what's existing in one that is not in the other? So the question that we have to ask is still, why send out? Why send out the ravens specifically? Okay, let's look at but we have within our questions, why does it say by the dove, me'ito, he sends it out from himself, and why does it mention why he sent it out, whereas there's no reason given by the raven itself, okay? The Chizkuni says something similar to what Al was mentioning before. It says, Vayishalach et ha'orev. Why did he send out a raven? Lefi shedarko le'echol nivelot, right? So here they add in some extra words here, but it says, why did he send it out? Because it is their way to eat nivelot, a carcass, or they'll eat anything. And so if the waters had decreased, it's going to find some food to eat. It's going to find that the waters have now washed up. They're on the basically in a way that you can access them, and it's going to then bring it back to him. And we'll see. Now it mentions here, again, I don't know where they're getting this from because that's not in the actual Hebrew. It says, if he sent a pigeon, which is more circumspect in terms of what it chooses as its food, right? So again, you can insinuate that from the words, but here the Chizkuni says, why choose a raven first? Because they're going to eat anything. And so they're going to come back with some food showing that there is dry land in a sense. But those questions that we raised of why, when he sends out the Yonah, is it different? Right? Why does it say from the Yonah that it was me'ito, from him, and there's the reason given? So the Chizkuni doesn't really answer that. Doesn't really seem to. It just seems to suggest that it's just like that. This leads the Ha'emek Davar, who is Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, the great Lithuanian Torah scholar, of course, the student of the Vilna Gaon. He wonders why both of these birds. Okay, he wonders not just why the raven, but why both of these birds. And I apologize, it's only in Hebrew. I'll go slowly through the Hebrew and we'll learn this together. Yesh lihitbonen, lama shalach shnei ofot halalu davka, orev v'yonah. We should contemplate, why did he send these birds specifically, davka, a raven and a dove? V'halo yesh harbe ofot sheporchim tov yoter mehem. But behold, there are many birds that fly much better than these birds, right? These are the birds that you send out. Send out like an eagle, right? Big, powerful animal, right? Send out a hawk. Why send out these guys? Vitu, and furthermore, me'ayin haya reshut lenoach lehotzia min hateva lifnei zman hayitzia lekulam. And furthermore, God tells Noach, I want you to take in all of these animals and keep them there until the flood's over and then send them out. The question is, where does Noach, me'ayin haya reshut lenoach, from where does Noach have the permission, lehotzia min hateva, to send them out of the ark, lifnei zman hayitzia lekulam, before everybody else, right? Why is Noach saying, you guys go out? How does he have permission to do such a thing? Right? So the Ha'emek Davar, the Netziv asks two questions. Number one, why these two birds? Why a dove or a raven? And number two, how does he have permission to do such a thing? So he answers in the following way. Al Kain, therefore, Haya nira lefi pshat. It appears according to pshat, to the simple reading of the text, De'orev v'yonah halalu Lo hayu min hazugot shenichnesu lachayot zera b'dvar Hashem. It appears to suggest that the raven and the dove, these ravens and doves, the ones that he sent out, were not of the pairs that Noach brought into the ark in order to ensure that their seed would continue according to the word of God. God does not command him to take these particular birds. Maybe he told him to take ravens in general, right? Addressing kind of what Craig was talking about, which we're going to touch upon a little bit more. Maybe he told him to take, but not Edgar the Raven, right? Edgar the Raven is his personal one. What does he say? Let's read this here. Ella bishvil shahaya Noach lifnei mehamabul ke'echad min asarim. Rather, that Noach, before the flood, he was one of the rulers. He was one of the local, politicians. Shemin hagam haya gam az legadel oravim v'yonim. Their custom, the custom amongst the wealthy in those days, they weren't getting one of those things. No, there's another word for it. It's not a judel. Is it a judel? No, what's the word for a cavoodle? It's like what's the word? Anyway, in those days, they weren't getting, little custom-made dogs. They were getting what? They were raising doves, and they were raising as sport. And that's something well known, right? That people would raise doves and raise ravens. And maybe you've been on hikes in Israel and you've seen some of the dove cots and the way in which they keep these doves. So what the Netziv says, why did he send out this raven and this dove? Because they were his. They belonged to him. And they came in on their own. Or he brought them in. They're his pets. And so he could send them out with confidence to go out and do what he needs them to do. So the Netziv gives an answer, but still we haven't answered the questions that we've raised before, except what's the me'ito from himself, but he doesn't mention it from the raven, though. Right? It says by the Yonah, by the dove, that he sent it out from himself, right? Because it's his. But it doesn't mention that from the raven. Questions, comments, thoughts?
I don't think the Black Lives Matter Brigade would be very happy with this.
Well, there are some elements discussing the color of the ravens specifically, but we're not going to touch upon that at this moment right now. So maybe there's something else going on as to why, because again, we mentioned the Ha'emek Tava. We have two questions really. Why does it say that he sent it out from himself, from his own? And why does it say by the dove that there's a reason why he sent it out, but by the raven it doesn't? So the Netziv says the reason why he sent these guys out, even though they didn't have permission, is because they belonged to him. But that doesn't sit so well with the raven, because the raven, it doesn't say that he sent it out from himself. So now let's look at one more source in this frame of thinking, which is the Or HaChaim. The Or HaChaim says the following thing, okay? And sorry, if there's any kids in the room, this is where it's going to start to get PG-13, maybe bordering on M. See what happens. Now people are paying attention. Achein, kavanat hakatuv hu al pi ma'amar rabotenu zichronam livracha. However, this pasuk, this verse must be understood in light of the Agadah. Okay, so this is a Gemara which tells over a narrative interpretation, a creative narrative interpretation of the pasukim. Ki ha'orev shimesh bateva, that the raven mated while in the ark. V'yada bo Noach, and Noach knew. Meaning, were they allowed to mate in the no. There was no mating, no hanky-panky for all 40, however long. No, they were in there for a year, right? So Noach knew that he did this. How? I don't know. V'lazeh kishepatach chalon hateva garash ha'orev mahateva tekef umiyad. And therefore, when this, I'll just read the English so it's clear for everybody. This is why he expelled the raven from the ark as soon as he opened its window. V'hu amro vayishalach et ha'orev, and this is why it says, and he sent out the raven v'lo hiskir lirot hakalu hamayim kemo she'amar achar kach b'shlichut hayonah. And this is why the Torah does not mention that the raven was dispatched. It should be with an I, Sepharia. Or maybe dispatched? Dispatched? I don't know. Maybe is there dispatched? I'm not sure. Might be a word. Was dispatched. But yeah, anyway, whatever. In order to examine the extent to which the waters had receded. If you remember, we spoke earlier. It says, why did it say by the dove that he said it in order to see whether the waters had receded, but it doesn't say that by the raven. So maybe what's happening is here, Noach kicks him out, right? It's like kicking his high school, I don't know, his teenage kid out of the house because they're, caught sleeping around with the boyfriend, right? So that's kind of what's going on here. He kicks them out here. Let's just do it in the English a little bit more. The raven was forced to remain outside the ark, though it tried to return to it. And the situation continued until the waters on earth had dried out. And then finally, so that's why it says, Yatzav Ashov, he's going back and forth. He's going back and forth because he wants to get in. But Noach says, no, you're out. There was rules here. Where's the Or HaChaim getting this from? So this is a Gemara here that says the following thing. Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught, Shlosha Shimshu Bateva. The rabbis taught that there were three who engaged in intercourse in the ark. V'kulam laku, Kelev, v'orev, v'cham. They were all kind of punished in some way. They are the dog, the raven, and Cham, who was the son of Noach. Kelev nikshar, a dog is bound. I guess the idea there is that dogs get tied up, right? And they're kind of like, it's actually, out of all animals, a dog probably has done the best evolutionary-wise, right? You would think dogs have done pretty well at this point. That's a point aside, but nonetheless, they have to be bound up. The raven was punished in that it spits, okay? And Cham was afflicted, again, without getting into what Al said before, in that his skin turned black. We'll edit this part out later on. Again, that has to do with a certain understanding of things that existed during those times. But nonetheless, the idea is that the raven was punished. So the Gemara here says it was punished in that it spits, but it could also be the fact that it gets kicked out. It gets pushed out of the teva. Okay, so that starts to help us understand why you have this discrepancy in the verses between the raven and the dove. Questions, thoughts? What are we thinking? How are we sitting right now?
With the two different types of birds, perhaps the raven was sent first because it can fly further, and therefore it would be more likely to be able to find land by going further and then coming back than the dove, which would perhaps not be able to fly so far. I mean, I don't know enough about birds, but that may be. So
you're giving there a good kind of scientific approach, which again we'd have to check the science on that. What that does not do is account for the discrepancy in the verses, right? That might explain why he sends the raven first and then the dove, but it does not explain why the verses use that strange language, and that's what the Or HaChaim's trying to explain. He's saying that okay, maybe they belong to him. Okay, that might be one given, and the second thing is that the raven is kicked out. He's not sent on any message. On any mission. It's not a mission. He's going because he's kicked out. Okay. What's impressive about the raven within this is that he survives, right? Right. If you're going to understand it that way. Okay. But this is not the only midrash that we have in relation to the raven. There's some fascinating other midrashim which seem to suggest some other things as well. So let's jump in here. It's the continuation of that Gemara up above, right? We just learned that the raven was kicked out because it engaged in intercourse when they were not allowed to. So look what the raven says. Vayishalach et ha'arev, and he sent forth the raven. Amar Reish Lakish said the following thing. Teshuva nitzachta, right? The raven gave a good answer. Heshivo orev leNoach. So, meaning the raven provided a convincing response to Noach, right, when he tried to kick him out. Amar lo. So the raven says to God, Rabech son'eni ve'ata sinateni. So the raven says to Noach, your master, meaning God, hates me and you hate me. Okay, what does that mean? Rabech son'eni, your master hates me, min hateorin shiva, min hatmeim shnayim. How does God hate the raven? Quoth the raven nevermore, right? What is the raven quoth? He says, God commands Noach to take 7 of the seven type, of the pure species, 7 amounts, and 2 from the non-kosher. A raven's not kosher, and so therefore he's saying you're putting, you're basically leaving things to chance. I've got, it's only me and my bird, right? It's only up to us, and we're in trouble if something happens. So like I'm already out on the down and outs, okay? Ve'ata sinateni, and you hate me. Why do you hate me? Shata meniach mimin shiva v'sholech mimin shnayim. Right? He says, so too you hate me. You're leaving. You've got a whole bunch of birds that are kosher, and there's 7 of them hanging out by the cooler, and you're sending me, and it's only me and my bird, and you're gonna, like, what's gonna happen? Right? And let's just do, if the angel of heat or the angel of cold harms me and kills me, will the world not be lacking one species of creature? Which I think is what, Craig, you were talking about before, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's a great point, right? Or perhaps, so look what he says to him. O Shema liishti atat tzarich. Or maybe you're sending me away because it's my wife that you need. So the raven is starting to suspect Noach of some ulterior motives of sending him out. Okay, and so this again, it's starting to put out a strange sort of.
Sounds like a soap opera.
It is exactly like this weird sort of interspecial.
Very Roman thing to do.
In what way?
Well, the Romans were I think the Romans were quite Roman leaders quite commonly would send the husband of a good-looking woman off to war.
Well, who else? I mean, who else? We have examples of that in our. Who sent out a husband off to war?
David.
Yeah, right. David sends.
Jonathan, was it?
No. Bathsheba.
Uriel, no?
Sorry.
Uriel, isn't it?
No. The name is.
Yeah, there's a Haftorah somewhere about it.
Uriah. Yeah. Uriah, that's it. Uriah, right? Uriah Chiti sends Uriah off, and in order to take Bathsheba, and that's a very, very famous story, right? So you're right. This does, so the raven, knows that story, and so he, seems to suggest that Noach was trying to do the same. Okay. Any thoughts or questions at this time? Yeah. Alex, yeah.
No.
Oh, you weren't raising questions.
I was just thinking.
So, what are we left with here, right? What sort of vision are we seeing here of the, of the raven at this moment? What are we seeing?
Got a bit of a chip on his shoulder.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a chip on his shoulder, and again, also like he's a guy. Again, according to within this this sort of Gemara, and again, I understand that we're personifying these animals here, right? That's obviously why do we do that? We do that to come to some sort of ethical teaching for ourselves, right? That's why we do that. Why we kind of project human emotion and thinking upon these animals who think about things obviously very, very differently, but we're left with this image of a raven who did the wrong thing according to the rabbis. The raven is a transgressor, right? He did the wrong thing on the ark, and then he's also suspecting Noach of trying to kind of get in and push him out of the picture, which is what he's trying to do, right? So Noach has a very kind of negative sort of perspective of the raven, and so he wants to get rid of him, and he sends him out. Noach sees the raven as a symbol of darkness and cruelty. Noach sees, within this line of thinking, Noach sees the raven as symbolic of what? Symbolic of everything that we tried to get rid of.
The reason for the flood.
Exactly, and if you think about it, right, the world before the flood was filled with great immorality. Both people were taking what was not theirs in every sense of the word, according to our understanding of what was going on. People were taking what was not theirs. And Noach saying, you're suspecting me of that sort of mind? That's where your mind is, clearly. We had a very clear, again, yes, we have to suspend our rational way of thinking about the world, right? We're talking here about conversations with the raven. But I think just like when you read a book in which there are conversations with the raven, and the raven and those interactions teach us something, so too here. Right? Noach sees the raven, which, as symbolic of everything that he tried to get rid of, or of everything that he survived. And so, according to this line of thinking, he pushes him away. He gets rid of him. He wants to destroy him. That is in comparison to the Yonah. The Yonah is this kind of pure. It symbolizes purity, certainly within our tradition. Yonah is white. The white is the purity of Yom Kippur, and the Yonah is everything that the raven isn't. Right? Everything that the raven is not. And so Yonah wants to get rid of him. But not everybody feels that way about the raven. Who thinks differently about the raven? Well, according to a fascinating midrash, God does. Let's look at this midrash together. The midrash says the following thing. And it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noach opened up the chalon. This supports the view that it was a trapdoor, and he sent forth a raven. Thus it is written, he sent darkness, and it was dark. And it went to and fro, Yatzov Ashov. Rav Yudan says in the name of Yehuda bar Rav Shimon, it began arguing with him. Of all the birds, sorry, I messed up. I was reading the wrong midrash. Where are we here? My apologies. Rav Barachi said the name of Rabbi Abba's name. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to Noach, take it back. So this is afterwards, because the world will need it in the future. Meaning God, once Noach sends away the raven, God says to him, take it back. We need it. When, he asked, when the waters dry off from the earth. He replied, a righteous man will arise and dry up the world, and it will cause him to have need of them, the ravens, as is written, and the ravens brought him bread and flesh. So God says to Noach, don't write off the raven just yet. The raven will be needed later on because of the story of Eliyahu Hatishbi. in the book of Malachim, Eliyahu the prophet, he goes off and he's on his way and he's running away. And it says the following thing. Eliyahu the Tishbi, an inhabitant of Gilad, said to Achav, as the Lord lives, the God of Israel, who I serve, there will be no dew or rain except at my bidding. Achav was wicked, and Eliyahu says there's going to be no rain. The word of the Lord came to him and says, leave this place and turn eastward and go into hiding by the Wadi Cherith. So the, where are we here? The Nahal Crete, which is the east of the Jordan. You will drink from the Wadi, and I've commanded the ravens to feed you there. He proceeded to do as the Lord had bidden. He went and he stayed by the Wadi Crete, which is east of the Jordan. The ravens brought him bread and meat every morning and every evening, and he drank from the Wadi. And so we see here, this Midrash is saying there's a reason why we want to hang on to the raven. Noach says, no, I want to get rid of it. Noach sees the raven as symbolic of pre-flood. This is, a mindset of trying to take what's not yours and trying to transgress the will of God. But God says, no, there is a need for him. There is a need for him. And I'm looking at the clock here, and so I do want to try to finish by 9 o'clock. So I'm just going to, unless anybody has any questions on this. But what's fascinating is this sort of idea that we're starting to paint. And by the way, this idea is not my own. I learned this from a Rabbi Ari Khan, who has incredible ideas, incredible perushim on the Torah. And this sort of idea of Noah looking at the world very, if you will, black and white, right? Meaning everything, it's got to be this way. It must be this way. And if you remember, we spoke about Elohim. The name of Elohim represents a certain kind of like set structure of how things. And Noach says, okay, the raven, you're out. You don't fit with the new world. You are out. That seems very comparable to the book of Yonah, which actually speaks about a Yonah, right? Once again, you have this character of a Yonah, of a dove. And the Yonah also kind of looks at the world in a very black and white sense. Are they wicked? Get rid of them. But what's even more interesting is where does and that's what I'm just kind of skipping through. We know these things. Yonah, who's he arguing about? He's arguing about the city of Nineveh. Interestingly, where does Nineveh come from? Let's look at this. The Cush yelled at Nimrod, right? And Cush also begot Nimrod, who was the first man of might on the earth. He was a mighty hunter by the grace of God, of the Lord, had the saying like a Nimrod, a mighty hunter by the grace of the Lord. The mainstays of his kingdom were Babylon, Erech, Achad, and Calnan, the land of Shinar. And from that land Ashur went forth and built Nineveh. Nineveh is built by Cush. Who is Cush?
He was the son of Adam and Chava, wasn't
Who was Cush the son of?
Wasn't he the son of Adam and Chava?
No. Who's Cush's father? Should have brought the pasuk before this. It's Ham, right? So Ham is another, right? If we kind of compare, if you will, Ham and the raven, because again, those were the two, and the dog. But forget the dog for now. Those were the two that seemed to transgress the will of God, even in the Teva. And not only that, Ham is the one, once they come out of the Teva, that violates his father in a way that we're not going to get into right now. And it's not clear what exactly happens there. We have multiple interpretations as to what happened there. But Ham is similar to the raven. Ham represents this kind of old God. Noah wants nothing to do with Ham. He messes everything up. And the world of Nineveh comes from that world of Ham, of Cush, and then Ham. Ham and then Cush. That's what brings it into the world. And so the story of Yonah is where you have like this kind of a incomparable concept of Nineveh, of the city that's doing the wrong thing, these inhabitants, these people who are doing the wrong thing. And Yonah is looking at them and saying, destroy them, right? God says, right, Noach says, please, Lord, take my life. I would rather, right? Yonah says, that doesn't make any sense. That does not make any sense at all what you're doing. But what would be, and let's just pause the sharing for a moment, what is, if you will, the message of Yom Kippur? Why do we read Yonah on Yom Kippur?
Shows the power of Teshuvah.
That there is some element of that. God does not want us to just be destroyed, right? God wants us to do Teshuvah, and Teshuvah is powerful and possible. And Yonah doesn't seem to get that. So too, Noach on the Teva sends away, we're done with you. You're done, you're out of here. Because he sees things very black and white. There's good and there's evil. Now, there is good and there's evil, but that's not actually the way that the world necessarily works. The world is not so black and white. It's not so clear. And with that, we'll kind of conclude before we open up with some, if anybody has any questions or comments, but with the words of Rabbi Ari Khan, who says the following thing. How appropriate that the symbol of God's covenant with Noach and through him with all of humanity is the many-colored rainbow. Right? That's what God chose him at the end to say that I've forgiven you. The world is not black and white. It is multicolored, and each color melts into the next. Good is merged with evil, and evil with good. The very existence of the world, the aftermath of the deluge, is a testament to the merciful God. And the symbol of his covenant is a spectacular mosaic of color. Even when the world seems foreboding, dark, and evil, we must learn from God and not from Noach or Yonah. We must look more carefully and learn to distinguish between the elements of the mixture. Good may be found amongst the evil, and things that don't look completely good are not necessarily completely bad. That is the lesson taught by the raven. So the raven, yes, does come to represent in the world of Edgar Allan Poe and within the mindset of the Chazal, the way that the rabbis, the way that they're understanding the way that Noach treated him. There is something wicked about this. But God says, no, there's a place for this. It's not always so clear, and you might not necessarily see it in your lifetime, but things are not black and white. Things are not black and white. The world is complex. The world is, topsy-turvy. But ultimately, right, the eternal message and symbol of God's love and care for the world is the rainbow, which celebrates all of creation in all of its expressions. And so by exploring and by contemplating the message and the symbol of the raven, we can come to understand the complexity of reality. The complexity of reality, and finally come to, once again, this place of seeing the rainbow as an expression of God's care and love for the world in all of its colors. Questions, comments, thoughts? Cool. Well, I enjoyed learning that. I hope you did too. I hope you have a wonderful Shabbos, and hopefully, we'll continue to do this for a couple weeks, and then even probably once we get back to shul, we'll still probably we'll be doing this, I would imagine, online for a little bit longer, and then hopefully at some point we'll be able to get back and learn Torah together in person. But in the meantime, I am enjoying spending this time with you guys in this space as well. So have an awesome evening, everybody, and a Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
See y'all.
Shabbat shalom.
Good
Bye.
Shabbos, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi.
See ya.
Thank you, Rabbi. So,